Welcome, Peter. We are so happy to have you here today. Peter Nordeen is a Baba historian for over 40 years. He has given a number of talks for us on Baba Zoom and is always graciously willing and kind enough to share his experiences and knowledge with us. So today his topic is the suffering of the avatar. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. A common question people ask when they first start learning of Baba is, if he is God, why does he have to suffer? The quick explanation is that humanity, left to its own devices, creates a maelstrom of suffering caused by self-interest in ignorance. And humanity in ignorance can never find its way out of this suffering. So the perfect masters, God in the form of perfect masters, has to suffer for humanity to bring them out of this cage of ignorance. Suffering is the God-man's means of redeeming humanity. In the very early years, 1924, in April, during the months of Gamela Yoga at Mehrabad, Baba gave a fine explanation on two types of perfect masters and the limitation of their work: the Videmukta and the Janma Mukta. The Videmukta is the perfect master who doesn't completely come down to gross consciousness, so there isn't a complete feeling. And the example Baba would give is that of one of his perfect masters, Sai Baba of Shirdi, who could put his arm in fire. When he served food to people, he would take his hand, instead of using a ladle, he would take his hand and dip it into a pot of boiling dal, like that, and pour the dal on people's rice, like that. That's how he served people. They would come in the line, and never bothered him. The Janma Mukta, Baba said, is that one who has more feeling, who feels, and because he has come down more to feel in the gross world, he can suffer more, and he is able to accomplish more. So then after that explanation, Adi asked, then how is it that Videmukta can accomplish anything if he's not feeling? And Baba explained, the Videmukta accomplishes work, but not to such an extent. The mental and spiritual suffering is still obvious to the Videmukta. It's the physical, the gross suffering that doesn't happen. But for the God-man, the avatar is the epitome of the Janma Mukta. He has to come down completely in order to accomplish his work. He has to feel completely. And Baba gave a nice explanation of that. He said, the perfect master acts perfectly human. Acts perfectly human. But the avatar must become absolutely human. There's the difference. So when Baba was coming down, we know the stories of Baba's pain in coming down. All perfect masters don't go through that same pain to that extent. Baba has explained that when Upasi Maharaj threw that stone and hit him on the forehead where Babajan had kissed him, he suddenly retrieved approximately 3/4 of his gross consciousness back. But it was the remaining 1/4 over those 7 years which was more difficult, especially the last bit. In February of 1919, Baba's father, Shariarji, purchased that property. For those of you who have been to Baba House in Pune, that property we know as Baba House. He purchased that in February 1919. And though the property was still occupied by the tenant, Baba could enter into what we know as his room through that back hall there, that side walkway, and enter into his room there. And that's where we see that stone in the floor where Baba used to slam his head, where he said the physical pain of slamming his head would relieve him of the spiritual suffering caused from coming down. You know, Baba put it this way. He said, I was forcibly brought down by the five perfect masters. And brought down completely. So that pain of that final coming down to gross consciousness is something that the avatar has to experience. The perfect masters don't have to experience that. That last painful bit, because every bit of the avatar's feeling facilitates his suffering. And his suffering is the means of his work. In 1953, when Irene Coneybear was writing the book Civilization or Chaos, she asked Baba for an explanation about this subject. And Baba dictated this nice answer. A perfect master works for the selected few in a chosen way and for the universe in a general way. The avatar works for the selected few in a special way and for the universe in a chosen way. So although both work for the universe and the field of their working is not limited, the scope of their work is different. The avatar's work is universal. Baba also explained in his discourses that the perfect masters never come back. They become perfect. They live the life of God once. And they work in the field of creation under the laws of creation. That means there is that limitation of time. So the accomplishment of any perfect master is always limited. On the other hand, the avatar is the only one, the ancient, original, essential one, who always has to come back to bear the eternal burden for creation. He is the original master, the original God-realized soul. This is such, the beginningless beginning is such a difficult thing for the ordinary intellect to perceive. The avatar has to bear the eternal burden for creation, to come again and again. His work is never done. His work for the age finishes when he drops his body. As long as he is physically alive, he is still working to some degree or another. It is the point when he drops his physical body that his work for that advent is released. And the real milestone of every avataric advent is the point where the avatar drops his body. You know, the Christians have this thing, Jesus died for our sins. The dying is not the thing. It's the suffering. Because people think we are this body and that is us, they have this thing that he died for our sins. He says he experiences simultaneously birth and death every second. It's not that, it's the suffering that causes an effect of redemption for humanity. During that coming down phase, Baba had developed a habit, besides slamming his head, of chewing pan. Pan is that aromatic leaf, and on that leaf also there is put some lime. I don't mean lime the fruit, I mean lime the alkaline paste, and that activates the leaf, but that's very bad on the teeth. But when Baba was coming out of that state, back down to gross consciousness, he developed the habit of chewing pan. It's a preoccupation to keep him into the gross world. That had a bad effect on his teeth, and he suffered with his teeth for years and years. Between the slamming of his head and the chewing of the pan in the early years, he began losing his teeth. And we know that through Baba's life, it is undeniable that he had made such efforts to accomplish each of those phases of his work and then integrate all those phases into the great universal work. For an example, in 1927, he began that 5.5-month fast while he was doing seclusion on Mehrabad Hill. Really reduced to a skeleton. We have a few photographs from that period. To raise the ashram boys, the Prem ashram boys. This was all part of work for the future. Future generations of spiritually advanced persons. And also archetypally for youth through God knows how many centuries. This idea of God coming is not new. I'm going to read to you something from Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet who lived about 7 centuries before Christ. This is the 53rd chapter from the book of Isaiah. He's describing 7 centuries in the future, the events which in his description seem to be a record of the past. He's talking about Jesus. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By arrest and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested that he was cut off from the land of the living, that he was punished for the transgressions of my people? He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit from his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the fruit of his suffering and will be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many. He will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for those transgressors. It is the purpose of religion to bring regular people through a path of right action and right inaction to the threshold of the spiritual path. It can't do more than that. Part of that responsibility for religion is also to acknowledge the coming of the Ancient One. But in this case, Orthodox Judaism has reinterpreted, misconstrued this to mean that he is really just the people of Israel, because that what happens, unfortunately, in organized religion is it becomes a business of rites, rituals, and ceremonies, which is designed to perpetuate itself, purposely missing the point. When in fact, the ancient one, the one who comes again and again, is the only one who can redeem humanity. He is the only one who does come again and again, not the perfect masters. And this is what is meant by the term, the only Son of God. The only Son of God. Baba did so many things in so many phases and seclusions and different things. He suffered so many afflictions. On it went. And it was as if he had some good suffering occurring, he would take advantage of it. That meant he wanted to really get his seclusion work done. Then this is the great opportunity. Or make an extra effort to do this work. Because this is the opportunity then. The opposition means the effect will be greater. So as much as the Mandali would discourage him from trying to make more effort, he would put them aside and say, no, now is the time. It has to be done. We're talking about his teeth in 1935. Baba went to America for that last trip, 34, 35. And that year, he suffered with his teeth badly. He had 5 teeth extracted that year. Teeth, of course, were saved. I don't remember the exact year. It was sometime in the 40s when he finally had lost all his teeth. In 1952, when Baba went to the West, before that, the new life has happened. Mananash has happened, all of this. During Mananash seclusion, it was such an exertion for Baba. He was suffering terribly with different things. And the Mandali said at some point, Baba would come out of that 100-day seclusion and he would just be panting, with his hands on his knees standing, panting, just exhausted. Before Baba went on that trip to the West in 52, some of the Mandali Mera encouraged him to get dentures made. Now, going back to the West after so many years, they wanted him to have dentures. Erich encouraged him also. Mera wanted Baba always to look his best for his lovers, for people, so they would get past any distractions of his physical disabilities. So Baba acceded to having this done. And of course, in the accident, Baba's face was injured, his jaw was jammed, so his tongue and his gums were badly injured. And that's when Baba stopped wearing those teeth. But you see, even the good intention of the Mandali, it's all inevitable. It's all inevitable. During the 3 incredible weeks, and those days he spent talking to the Western men on the hill were really superb. Really fine explanations he gave. We are all meant to be as honest as God, as loving as God, as happy as God, and only the Christ suffers for humanity, although he is the source of all happiness. You see me in this physical form, but every moment I am crucified. Only the fortunate ones know this. I suffer as no one could suffer. I suffer because I love. Psychologists look at this, from a safe distance and say, obviously this man is having a martyr complex. He's starving for attention. He's going to some radical extremes for attention. Dangerous behavior. Baba described this situation as God's perfect sense of humor. How can you say that, Christ being crucified, he said, was his perfect sense of humor. How is that? He said, because here he is, omnipotent God, but he allows himself the humiliation and the extreme suffering of crucifixion. He said that's God's perfect sense of humor. One of my favorite essays from the book Beams of Spiritual Panorama, the essay Avatar as the First Master. This is a little excerpt from that. The Avatar does not take upon himself the karma of the world, nor does he become bound by it. but he takes upon himself the suffering of the world, which is the result of its karma. His suffering for the world is vicarious. It does not entail entanglement with the karma of the world. But humanity finds its redemption from its karma through his vicarious sufferings, such as illness, humiliation, accident, and the like. In his own way, the avatar unfailingly fulfills his incarnation by giving a spiritual push to his age. The second accident happened in India. It's a full, long story. I won't go into all of that. But Baba would keep a cheerful face outwardly while he suffered all of this. Yet sometimes he would reveal it to his closest mandali, to the extent where they would see his complexion change, everything, in a snap like that. While they were there with him, he was miserable. It was obvious. His color was bad. Temperature was wrong. His blood pressure was bad. Everything was bad. And then suddenly, if someone from the outside came, he was rosy and cheerful and everything. He could turn it on and off, his physical condition. In other words, he would mask his physical afflictions when people who weren't the closest to him would come into his presence, because it would be shocking for them. They wouldn't understand. And in cases of darshan, he would know what was good for them, to see him in a better condition. After Baba dropped his body, the mandali got accused of trying to keep Baba in seclusion, cover him up. We saw him at darshan programs. He looked fine. What are you people saying? Why did you not let us come to see him? Before Baba went to the West for his last trip in 1958, he dictated a message that was sent to his lovers in Australia and America. I am coming to America and Australia solely to give my Sahabas to my lovers. And I want each of you to come with the longing to receive just that. Above all, I want the Sahabas to be a close companionship between your beloved and his lovers. If you wish to maintain this unique relationship, then do not come with questions or the desire to seek discourses and explanations. Come with the preparedness to receive fully whatever I give you, with the thought of being completely resigned to my will. My suffering is daily becoming more intense, and my health is daily growing worse, but my physical body continues to bear the burden of it all. Despite it all, I will hold the Sahabas. I expect from you a deep understanding of my self-imposed suffering, which is begotten of my compassion and love for mankind. Also understand, therefore, that I will not undergo medical examinations or treatment for my injured hip either in America or Australia. No doctor or treatment will be of any help before the pain I am undergoing has served its purpose. Remember that my coming is entirely to give my Sahabas to you all. This Sahabas will be unique in the sense that you will witness and share my present universal suffering by being near me as my fortunate companions, being with the Ancient One who will, at the same time, be completely on the human level with you. It will be helpful to all those participating in the Sahabas to know of the oft-repeated hint I have given to those living with me, reminding them of my declaration, wherein I stated that my glorification will follow my humiliation, and pointing out that this period of my Sahabas will fall within the orbit of my universal suffering and helplessness. You might recall that after Baba had that accident and he had all that issue with his hip, he would point to that joint and say, all pressure of the universe is bearing on this spot. Life at its best was printed that year. And in there, Baba made that remark, the whole universe is nothing but a jest, but unfortunately, the jest is on my chest. After the new life, Baba made that last long walking trek back to Marisad for the Mananash seclusion work. And after that, he went to America, his leg was broken. It was the end of those long walking tours. And after the second accident, his body was really wrecked in large part. Between the two accidents and the rigorous lifestyle, all those years of fasting off and on to accomplish the different phases of his work. And the added stress on his neck from constantly bowing down to sadhus, musts, the poor, tombs, places of worship throughout India. In 1960, Baba's continued work of seclusion was happening. There was another long period of seclusion. And on October 5th, Baba was planning another week of fasting with his seclusion work. And some of the Mandali were to take part in that. And that was when suddenly he started suffering with sores inside his throat and his mouth, then on his face and his ear, different places. And that was diagnosed later as herpes zoster. He had an extreme case of it. Bob would get extreme cases. He wouldn't get something. He would get an extreme case. People ask sometimes about, did Baba get vaccinations? Did he get inoculations? Yeah, he did all that. He had to get it before he went to the West, for an example, in 52. And naturally, Baba's reaction was bad. So with all the other things he was suffering from, his arm swelled up badly, and he suffered with that painful inflammation from the inoculation site. Going back to 1960, so Baba had this condition, herpes zoster. It was very painful. He also, at the same time, during this period, started going into a state of disinterest. Disinterest in everything. The Mandali could not bring him out of it. He would do nothing that he had usually done with them in the same way. He had no interest. It was as if he had entered a deep depression. So this, on a human level, seems like an obvious point of exasperation that he has now come to the point where he's so worn out, he's just depressed, and he can't go on facing this, and he just goes on dragging through every day. There was a change on October 30th when Nariman brought a famous surgeon, Ramginde, to Marisad to diagnose Baba's case. He came there, and of course, Doctors Goher and Duncan had done all their homework, so they had all these medical texts laid out with the pages open, pointing to all of these things. And he was mightily impressed that they took such care. He had heard of Baba, never met Baba. This was his first time meeting Baba. He immediately diagnosed Baba's case as a special rare syndrome. And the solution was that it could be mollified by doing an injection of alcohol into the spot on the brain. The needle would have to go in. He explained the procedure to Baba. It would have to be done like this, and do this. Baba said, good, do it. And Dr. Ginde said, it shouldn't be done here. You should come to Bombay. Baba said, no, you do it now. You do it here. You can do it. And Ram Ginde said he had his own teachers. He had watched them do this, and sometimes it would take them an hour and a half to do it, to make sure they got the right point. But Dr. Ginde was confident if Baba said to do it, he would do it. So he took the needle with the alcohol, injected it through the temple, approximately 2 inches into Baba's brain, and he told Baba, you signal me when you feel this particular sensation. and I will know I got the right point. Within 1 minute, he hit that point. And Baba said, it's it. And so he injected the alcohol and removed the needle. And there was instant relief. So for the first time in weeks, Baba ate rice and curry or something. Immediately. Everybody was happy, and Ginde left. But before Ginde reached Adi's office, the message came, the pain has come back. And actually, Ginde said, actually, that's a good sign. If the pain had not come back, there would have been permanent damage. But if the pain has come back a bit, it means that the alcohol has been absorbed, but the point has been hit, and gradually it should relieve itself. And that's what happened over the course of months. That pain went away. Baba's indifference did not go away. There was a short period of 5 days or a week, the end of November, when Joe Harb and Ben Hay came for a visit, when Baba, again, was smiling for them, and the Mandali enjoyed that, but they also knew that Baba was masking his physical condition to them. When they left, that state of indifference came back. Merwan Jesawala wrote this. His birthday was in November, and he would be invited sometimes. And so he was invited during November of 1960. This is his comment about Baba during that time. It would be so painful for us. We never saw him this way, as if for the first time Baba had lost his sense of humor, which had never happened before. It was an extremely distressing atmosphere. He said he was having tremendous pressure of work. You have no idea of what I am suffering, he would say. Such stray remarks he would make. It was sort of a nerve-shattering experience for us all. Once it became so unbearable that for the first time I heard Erich burst out, Baba, really, this is now unbearable for all of us. We request you to please stop the suffering upon yourself. We don't care for any benefit for us. We don't care for realization. Burn us all up. We request you to please ease a little of the burden on yourself. We can't bear to see you suffer like this. There was a hushed silence, and in spite of all this, Baba looked up, and there was a slight shadow of a smile on his lips. And Baba brushed Erich aside and said, restrain yourself and don't get carried away. This was the only response Baba gave. We could only imagine what stress he must be under at that time. That went on even into the months of going to Guru Prasad for the summer. Finally, first week of May sometime, there was a children's program at Guru Prasad. So the Baba lovers, children from the Pune area, all came for a children's program. And in their innocence, they're unaware of Baba's state. That kind of broke the ice. And Rustam and Sohrab doing a skit of a mother and a baby. That also brought Baba out of this funk that he had been in for months. The East-West gathering happened in November the following year, and Baba made this statement during the East-West gathering. Again and again, God takes human form to suffer for his creation. I am that one. Like you, I have a body and mind, and so I feel hunger and thirst, heat and cold, etc. But I also have the universal body and universal mind, and therefore your individual suffering is nothing compared to my eternal, infinite, universal suffering. I have infinite knowledge. I do not have to use my mind in order to know. I just know. I do use my infinite knowledge, but although I have infinite bliss and infinite power, I do not use them. Were I to make use of that bliss that is at my beck and call, how could my suffering be suffering? And of what benefit would it be to mankind? I also do not use my infinite power. Were I to use it, how could I remain helpless? I remain infinitely helpless because, while having infinite power at my command, I do not use it. I shall use it only when I break my silence to give a universal spiritual awakening. And when I drop this body, I shall use my bliss for 700 years until my next advent. I suffer mentally and physically. My mental suffering is more intense. I suffer spiritually because I see and feel myself bound in you by your ignorance, and so I suffer. A few months later, March 31st, 1963, Baba made these comments. Although I have infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss at my disposal, as the God-man, I do not use my infinite power and bliss for my avataric work. Otherwise, how could I experience the helplessness of the whole world? I suffer infinitely for humanity to relieve them of suffering. It is for their sake that I specially come as avatar. I suffer tremendously physically. This is why my body was completely shattered in 2 automobile accidents. My mental suffering, too, is infinite, as I suffer for all the hypocrisy in the world, for all hypocritical saints. Lastly, I suffer infinitely spiritually because even though I myself am completely free, I experience myself as bound and all men in ignorance. I have to suffer for them. But as avatar, I use my infinite knowledge. That is why I know everything of the past, present, and future. I am omniscient without using my mind. A few months later, again at Guru Prasad, during the 1965 Darshan program there, no one knows how I am suffering. My suffering is not only physical, but also mental and spiritual. There is a great difference between your mental and spiritual suffering and mine. My mental suffering is very intense, and it is because of the pseudo-saints that abound in the world today. My spiritual suffering is because I know I am free in myself, but bound in you. This was made in 1965. The first statement was made in 1963. Baba reiterates in 65 what he had said then, earlier in 63. His mental suffering is largely due to the bogus gurus, the false saints in the world. The hypocrisy of that, which he said is actually unforgivable. If we look at the film of Baba in 1965 at that darshan and read these words, it's as if it's so obvious, seeing his physical form and the condition he's in, his breathing, his face, his expressions. He's simultaneously experiencing both extremes. And it reminds me also, going back to 1958, seeing that footage of Baba outside the caretaker's cabin at the center, where he's doing some intense spiritual work. His hands are doing this, moving, and his eyes are moving back and forth. Very serious atmosphere where everybody just, it was pin drop silence. And you think of all that America has been going through recently and thinking, Baba was just working the inevitable. What America will have to go through, seems to me. So as Baba's body was deteriorating in 1963, he had all that spondylosis issue with his neck from those, God knows, hundreds of thousands of times of bowing down to different people. His body was breaking down. But he used that suffering and integrated into his seclusion work to bring his universal work to a culmination. Finally, in the end, in 1968, the term was exclusion seclusion, because even so many of the very closest disciples of his didn't have contact with him. Where he had his lovers around the world every day saying prayers, the Master's prayers, prayer of repentance, keeping silence on Silence Day, all of this. And then at the end of July making that statement, my work is completed 100% to my satisfaction. Yet he still went on working. And Bao would explain to us how he would hammer his thigh with his fist to maintain his length with the gross body. And have Bao do it, or Pendu or Erich, how difficult that must have been for them. But that was obedience. In late December, after that last film taken of Baba, Dharan Amrit's wedding, Mara's birthday, where the few hundred people had the great opportunity to be with him at Marazad, and he was actually saying goodbye to many of them. Their stories are like that. Kind of giving hints. Through the months he had given hints, but you know, the way it was with the Mandali, Baba had said so many things through the years, it may or may not be relevant. We don't know what he's doing in his own language. But then looking back on it, all these things made sense after he dropped his body. After the last gathering there at Marazad, Baba's health really began to deteriorate and this issue with the spasms started becoming extreme. How could somebody in his condition, an old man, physical old man, get such a spasm that his body would bounce a foot off his bed? To the point where a few times his body bounced right off of the bed. How could that be? What kind of energy is that? It was, as Baba had said in his final declaration, a peculiar disease will attack my body before I drop my body. While he was going through this, though, and the Mandali were all so concerned what to do. They understood, but still they had to do their best. They understood Baba's constant explanation. This has nothing to do with you. This is my work. He gave them an opportunity to serve him and to be near him, and on their own levels had to do their best, but they also understood that it's his own work. One day in late December, Baba reminded them, as he often did, don't forget that I am God. I know everything. Just do as I say. And he explained the pressure of my universal burden reflects upon my physical body. And as the strain of my work in seclusion is severe, the effect on my body is consequently severe. But though the effect is human, the cause is divine. And it is therefore in my hands. I have taken on the form of man to take on the suffering of man. And this went on, we know all the story, the last few weeks, all that had happened, all those hints. And in that morning, January 31st, when several of the Mandali were there and so concerned, and Donkin was just at his wit's end, had done his best. Goher had done her best, and Baba warned people before, don't anybody blame Goher for my health conditions. Has nothing to do with her. It's my work. And on that morning of the 31st, Baba looked at Donkin with almost a look of excitement when Donkin was unable to do anything more. Baba said, just imagine, all of this has been just for that one word. Baba explained that that last period, as Bao describes it, was the tail of his work. The tail of his work. What does that mean? Erich explained it beautifully some months later. Baba said his work was finished 100% to his satisfaction in July, and it would begin manifesting from the end of September. Yet Baba continued doing that work, and it was most severe, and he suffered the most ever as they had seen him, with these spasms and his health deteriorating, all these things happening. So Baba described that as the tail of his work, the end of his work, before the release of his work. And Baba gave this analogy. He said, I am like a commander who has been mortally wounded on the battlefield and is about to fall to his death. But as he stumbles, he sees some ants on the ground. And in his compassion, he stumbles a few more steps to avoid falling on the ants. And so Erich explained, and what were those ants? Truth-loving humanity. Truth-loving humanity. That is, people who have an affinity for the truth, but they don't yet have any connection with the spiritual master, but they have that urge for the truth. And for those people, that extension of his work, of his suffering was done. Any specific questions about any specific points of Baba's suffering? This is not a subject that the Mandali enjoyed talking about.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's wonderful. Let's open up for questions. So yeah, it is a hard topic, but I'm so glad you're doing it. Elizabeth has a question.
The enormous resources that he used to bear on this really difficult subject that's so hard for all of us to comprehend. Why suffer? And then this issue about sanskaras, a lot of people have talked about that. Does the suffering lift the sanskaras, and how does that happen? Does he take on the sanskaras, or what happens? But I wanted to know where all these resources are, if we wanted to find them later. And I don't know. I also wanted to offer my assistance sometime, if you ever do a weekend works for the History Museum in Asheville. I just started thinking about it. I thought, why don't I do something to help? I really admire what you're doing, and I think it's really important.
If we ever finish the Red Oak School renovation, it's going to be a beautiful facility for doing these things. The resources, they are all over places, many places. Now, a few of us old-timers, when we were young, we were there with them, absorbing this information out of interest. We weren't absorbing this information to record the history, per se. It was our obsession to absorb anything about Meher Baba. So we did that. Over many years, any serious, I don't like to use the word student of Meher Baba's life and work, but let's say, for lack of a better word, any serious student of Meher Baba's life and work understands that there is a logical path using critical reason to cross-reference things, use proper sources. First-hand opinions are important. They shouldn't be dismissed. But ultimately it is with each individual to assess those things, to make sense of it. We have to be careful that the gauge doesn't become academic, because the academic world is not the gauge. The academic world with its lexicon is not the gauge for Meher Baba's life and work. Not. Can never be. I'm not interested in assuaging any academic, secular efforts. Eventually, that will happen as a side effect of Meher Baba's manifestation, I believe. And speaking to posterity, I will say, just remember that the academic secular world is not the gauge for Meher Baba's life and work. The information he has given is the gauge. He is the gauge. He is the gauge. Mayor Baba, in all of his explanations and discourses, never said, now perhaps, and so said this, and perhaps. No, he never used the word perhaps. It was, this is this, that is that, this is this, and so beautifully and succinctly put that even if people don't understand the material, the presentation, the thread of the thought process is undeniably brilliant. And that makes people pay attention. It's not a jumble. It might be difficult for people to understand, but the presentation is brilliant. So when you put all of these factors together, it's really a lifetime. It's a lifetime of exposing ourselves to this. And if we have the sanskaras to do it, we do it. Ultimately, understanding is not important. But, Baba said, understanding those particular things is important for his lovers. I want my lovers to understand and appreciate my suffering, the effort of my work. It's his perfect humility that makes him say, I'm suffering for you. An ordinary person couldn't say that, but he could honestly say that. It's not pretentious.
All for one word.
All for one word.
Yes.
What that means.
Peter, thank you. I still need clarity. You said that Baba, as the avatar, after he drops his body, is existing in 700 years of bliss. Correct?
He said resting.
Resting. Okay, so my question is, and I still don't have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take it down to my level. So if a so-called Baba lover and I disobey Baba, is that impacting his suffering even though he's in 700 years of bliss?
He's beyond time and space, and he's already done the work for our shortcomings. That doesn't mean we should just make no effort. He wants us to make effort.
So is that a yes? It impacts his suffering?
Not anymore. He's already done it. The thing to remember is this, and this is where I think people miss generally Baba's explanation. Now, okay, preface this explanation by saying next week is the Avataric Legacy presentations. And that is now concerning the years 54, 55, I believe. So what I did was take the section on Baba's messages and work concerning manifestation. Those 5 messages that were given in 54 and 55 and all those explanations and going back and forth using mostly Baba's own explanations concerning this, but also some obvious other points of view. I believe a mistake that people make is that, for an example, when Baba said, there will be a period of my humiliation, my great suffering and humiliation, which will bring about the breaking of my silence, quickly followed by my glorification and my manifestation. And this dropping the body is before or after manifestation. Baba has also explained that all of his work is accomplished while he is in the physical body. So that was puzzling to people, that Baba had said he would break his silence with his physical mouth, and then he would experience that manifestation, enjoy that manifestation. He dropped his body, and at the time they didn't say that he had made any sound, but of course then later we find out that Erich said, yeah, about a week before he dropped his body, he made that sound in his room, which was not just clearing his throat. At the time, Erich let the cat out of the bag. It was the period of the Mandali era, and they didn't want any focus on Baba's silence. They wanted the focus on Baba's humanity and his love. They didn't want people coming for sensationalism. They didn't want people to be focusing on these subjects that were beyond their understanding. You can, a little bit, but what they had to give us was something much greater. We came starving for Baba's humanity, and they gave that to us. But regarding Baba's work and his manifestation, the breaking of his silence, yes, physically all that work was accomplished, and it could be argued that Meher Baba did arguably break his silence physically with his own mouth on that day. Yet there wasn't an instant reaction, apparently. That's because the paradigm we expect it to happen in, our gross world of time and space, is illusion. But there was a radical difference in the mental world. We know that from the statements of Muhammad the Must, who was our eyewitness to the mental world without a break. Not somebody who had an objective experience through meditation, but somebody who was wide open constantly in the mental world subjectively. And his experience was something different after Baba dropped the body, that Baba is everywhere. So we can't say how long it will take for Baba's manifestation. Now, I'm not going to get into this because it took me over an hour to do this whole explanation. But the thing to remember is that we expect satisfaction and a reaction in our paradigm, which is not reality. It is illusion. That's different. It will happen after a period of great suffering and struggle that humanity has to pass through. This delay in time is out of his own compassion for the very world that ignores him or disdains him. For those people who mock him, ignore him, it's for all of them anyway, and he suffers for that ignorance. It is inevitably, invariably, always the way it is. Marta, was that okay?
I don't understand, but that's my perception and that information. I'll just have to sit with it and ask Baba to help me. Thank you.
Okay. What I remember your question was, now we're not always obeying Baba. We're not perfect. And now is he suffering more? He has suffered for everything up to the next advent. So now it is the responsibility of the next avatar to bring us all that much closer. But the way Erich put it is like this. Every individual starts out like an infant rolling on the ground, and then they learn to crawl, and they keep stumbling and trying to walk, and eventually they can stand upright and walk. And that's the way it is in the spiritual path. This takes time.
Meher, Sagar, Jai Baba.
Hey Baba. So,
Hey, Baba.
Peter, in one of the talks, Erich mentioned that suffering keeps the soul polished. Could you please throw more light on that? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's our own personal suffering, not Baba's suffering. And Baba said that suffering was the essential for spiritual advancement. The number one thing. It is the shock therapy for the ignorant to come out of that inertia of ignorance. Keeps the soul polished, yes. Cause and effect on the spiritual path. If you do this, you suffer. It's not complicated. The masters give, at minimum, advice to people who will heed their advice. They give hints to people who don't want to have advice. They give advice to people who will heed their advice, and to their disciples they give orders. Meher Baba, as a master, didn't have thousands of disciples. They weren't ready for it. He had hundreds. Now he has thousands. During his physical lifetime, no. Every individual, of course, has to pay the price. It's not something for nothing. The problem is, the human attitude is that I pay a price, I make effort, it's my dividend. And this is why the average person who makes spiritual effort does so through yoga or a system of yoga, which means an effort to advance so that they might gain a deeper insight or a deeper strength, sometimes in the worst case powers. But the real thing is not to gain, it is to lose. Is to lose falseness. So Baba summed up the spiritual path this way. He said, the spiritual path means I want nothing. Baba gave many discourses on the importance of suffering.
Yeah, Mihal Namo has something she'd like to.
Hey, Baba. Thank you for so many things and your deep dedication and experience with the Mandali and working with them and hearing from them. And thank you for all your talks. And also, I really am very impressed by what you're doing with the building of the archives. It's so beautiful. But I must say, that when you're saying that Baba is resting, actually, I feel he's very, very present in my life. He's very alive. So he's not in the body anymore. So I'm so happy for that he is not taking suffering on his body. Yeah, because he was human. He felt everything. So now he's not doing that. So I'm glad for that. I'm happy for that. But I do feel him alive, completely alive.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Baba himself has said, I never leave. I never come. I never go. Essential, original, ancient one with the eternal responsibility. So he never disconnects in that sense. But he does rest. Now there are different opinions. When Baba dropped his physical body, some people feel he didn't drop at least his mental body. They feel he was still working on the higher planes, in a sense, doing something there for so many years more. Baba in the early years would say, I will live to the age of 90. I will be there till the age of 90. So there are different thoughts about that, and we may or may not. It's all speculation.
I also think that he said, I also understand that he said that he'll be present 100 years for everyone, even those who are not his lovers. And after that, only for those who will call him specifically.
Yes, so there's a period, and this also has to do with the realization of the first circle, Baba's first circle. And these are the people who really were in the grind with Baba. It depends on the length of time to the next advent. And in this case, in a 700-year span, Baba said that period of grace exists for about 100 years after he drops his physical body. So that is as if he is still there in many ways. Gradually it fades. And then that manifestation happens. The period directly after the avatar drops his body is a period of conflagration in the world, of suffering, a lot of turmoil. And then comes the flowering of the Advent. That occurs when the first circle all achieve realization. And that is within that 100-year period. I believe some of them are probably back now and beginning to function as some of the perfect masters. I believe that's true. Doing their work. Who is better suited to execute the manifestation of the avatar than his own Mandali? I'll give you an example how they also suffer. They share in his suffering. Baba, during those years, the Musturs, the new life, he developed a severe condition of hemorrhoids and fistula, suffered tremendously with it. He went through treatment after the 100-day seclusion. He had to do seclusion for 100 days, that intense work, and he couldn't sit comfortably. He often had to stand doing that intense work. The next year, before he went to the West, he went to the hospital in Ahmednagar to have a procedure done. And this is cauterizing the hemorrhoids, the piles. The doctor was nervous and Baba was in a hurry. Do it quickly. So the doctor dropped the red-hot cauterizer on Baba's anus. Not only Baba, but many of the Mandali, Erich, Baidu, severe piles, bleeding, Bao, they all went through these operations for hemorrhoids and fistula. They all suffered with this. Pendu, severely. This eating nothing but dried chana on must tours and being constantly on the move with Baba, no regularity. It was Baba's lifestyle, and they were with them. It was their lifestyle, so they all suffered. The story of Baidul, once Baba sent him to the post office or someplace to check on a message. And Baidul went there, he came back walking. Baba said, "Did you get it?" "No, it was such and such." "Go back. Don't come back until you have it." And Baidul is walking away. There's a trail of blood running out of his pants. Eric says, "Baba, see, he's bleeding badly. Shouldn't we just send him with the car?" Baba says, "Oh, you're compassionate." "I don't know that. Do I not know that? You think you're compassionate?" So these close circle people have the end of their own sanskaras. All their sanskaras have been transmuted. As Baba explained, they can't take on new sanskaras anymore. They can't be affected. But he uses the balance of what's left of those transmuted sanskaras in his work. And whatever the past is of each of those circle members, they represent that age in a certain way, in a specific way. And he uses their suffering to work through the karma to facilitate that effect of his work and simultaneously to free that circle member for eventual realization. This is not for everybody. This is only for very special souls. Everybody doesn't become a member of the avatar circle. And more especially for those who are closer. They have to go through things. That's just an example of how the circle members also have to suffer. They don't only suffer for themselves. Their suffering is also used by Baba to facilitate his work into whatever section of humanity is connected with that circle member. If they're going to be perfect masters, this is also conditioning for that, because the perfect masters are those souls who have the capacity to serve and suffer. Simply put, it's not people who want to see the fun and beauty in creation. It is people who have the capacity to serve and suffer. Those souls become the perfect masters. The Majzub, the perfect Majzub, experiences no suffering. They don't experience creation. Their reality is the I am God state, infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, and creation does not exist for them. And their body is an automatic reaction. It's going on because it is God who is perpetuating their existence in the human form.
Go ahead, Candy. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Hi, Peter.
I
Actually, you started to touch on my question that I had earlier on regarding the sharing of Baba's suffering. Because in the late 60s, I heard the terms, "Oh, you are sharing in Baba's suffering." That was like not about the Mandali members. It was
Right.
just about us regular lovers. And I always thought that was a mental construct. I thought, oh yeah, really,
You could say you're sharing in Baba's suffering. How much?
Yeah, I mean, really.
Okay, it's a sharing. Our own suffering is tantamount to progressing the universe, but it's like the butterfly effect. It's just, that much. Even Baba's own brother, Baram, who suffered a lot in his life, Baba said, Baram has shared in my suffering. Yeah, that much. So if it was Baram was that much, where's the really tight pinch of our suffering?
But then, how is it possible to actually share in Baba's suffering?
It's only that if we suffer, especially if we suffer in silence, we're acknowledging or allowing that our suffering is helping us to progress. As Bob has said, suffering is the ladder towards realization.
Now, if we suffer happily and laugh about it,
Yes.
then we would be helping Baba. If
Yes.
we are sharing his suffering, indeed.
If we can do it with humor and grace, it's the best. The other thing is, Baba had explained this to some degree. We don't really have that much problem with it in the modern world, but some people then had an idea that they should do penance.
Oh, God.
With Baba, you don't have to really be concerned about that. You get plenty. The best thing is just let it come and
Right.
try and take a breath and accept it. Allow it to come. Baba wants us to be natural human beings. To be cheerful and suffer in silence is a fantastic thing if it can be. And I'm not one to talk. I am not the person who remained 100% cheerful through all travesties in life. I say bad words sometimes, and I get frustrated. But I hear Baba said it's a good thing.
Yeah, yes. Okay.
Peter, there's a question in the chat from Adi V, and it says, what about the 20-year periods after Baba's dropping the body that I have heard about? Question mark, question mark. Do you know what he's referring to?
Mara was alive for 20 more years after Baba dropped his body. And Abao had this idea then that there were 5 phases in the 100-year period. Could say. I mean, it's also kind of compartmentalized thinking, but yes, I agree. Definitely there's something to do with Mara's presence on Earth before she passed away and she died the real death, because Baba said it was her last life. It's a significant mark in the Advent that Mara would pass away in the real sense. So that happened about 20 years after Baba dropped his body. And about another 20 years, it was basically the end of the Mandali age. So now you can say we're in that third 20 years, whatever that is. We don't know. You know, our intellectual mind likes to be compartmentalized, and there is something to that. We could say the first 2 roughly 20-year sections of the 100-year period were kind of obvious, with Mara passing away and then the end of the Mandali age.
Anybody?
Yes, I had something.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
So, Peter, regarding that aspect you just talked about, I'm not sure where it's written or from whom I heard it, but and it's related to Bao and the banana walla idea. The idea that people who may have met Bob in a previous life are in the first 20 years or something. So I devastated, I didn't get to meet Baba. And then somebody said, well, were you born with that 20 period? I said, yes. And then they made that comment. So can you enlighten us more on that?
Well, I don't argue with Bao Kulturi. If he says that, fine. On the other hand, Baoji made a lot of trips and he needed a lot of material. So he would talk about these things. But if he says that people were banana wallas, okay. He was there watching to some extent. That's when he joined Baba during the Fiery Free Life. First, met Baba. He joined Baba some months later. But Bao was a visionary. He was more than an ordinary person. I'm not saying he was infallible. I didn't say that, and I'm not one of these people who puts him on a pedestal beyond others. But Baba implied that Bao was in the first circle. How great is that? The Mandali never talked about this stuff, you know. We're talking about it now because that age is gone. I told Bob when he was alive, when all of you are dead, I'm going to start talking about the circle. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag, whatever I know. He just said, But I think it's important because a lot could be lost. And what I always say is that our generation has the responsibility of context. Baba had given a lot of explanation, but if people don't put all the pieces together and connect the dots, often that becomes a little misconstrued. So our responsibility in this generation is context, trying to give a broader picture. Our work is to what? Help people come closer to Baba by developing their own personal bigger picture of Baba's life and work and what that means.
And Susan McKendry is here, would like to.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Peter. The point that you made about context kind of leads back to what I wanted to observe about the previous conversation when we were talking about us being in the third phase. We don't know what that is, and it doesn't seem to me that we could have understood either of the first two phases while we were in the throes of them. You know, it's only in retrospect that we can understand what took place. And, you know, after Mara's death, we could say, oh, that's 20 years. Oh, you know, this last one must have to do with the Mandali. Well, we have no idea what the third one is going to be, and we won't in this lifetime. We're in the throes of it, so it's yet another mystery.
Yes. We can say that it is an acceleration of catharsis in the world, and when I go to gatherings, I see the same old people after so many years.
Yes.
Maybe this third phase is people who still are closely connected, paying attention to Meher Baba. Regarding any phase, I don't know about time, but I know that when Mara was still alive, all of us who were there thought, we are going to take advantage of this time.
Of course.
She is here, and to be with her in her presence, it was awe-inspiring.
Of course.
She was undeniably the embodiment of pure love. The Mandali aren't all gone and waiting to spring back. What I mean by that is there's always a continuity of some of the circle people who reincarnate in an interim lifetime. And some of those people are around. Some Baba gave a hint, they're there. Most of these people will probably be gone in another 10 years. But again, it's a marker in time that we're used to because Baba made that reference to the 100-year period. But all of these things overlap a little bit. It's not, we shouldn't have this idea that's just like saying exactly 8,400,000. It's not exactly, although God speaks might even say, because Baba's now gesturing when he's dictating that. Baba, by his own comment, said, in itself it is perfect, but he still had some editing adjustments he wanted to make regarding points in God speak. Digressing here, but the point is not just all compartmentalized. 8,400,000 means give or take 10, 20,000 lifetimes. Okay.
Of course.
At that point, who cares?
Well, here's Barbara with the wax. She's got a question for you.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Peter. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm not sure this is a question. It's just that it came up in a Baba meeting yesterday, and it's about human suffering, not about Baba's suffering, human suffering as a part of spiritual progress and as a part of our path to Baba. And we were talking about the fire and the Duni and throwing everything on the fire. There's just so much sometimes to think about, and I'm not really clear on what I'm going to say, so you don't even have to answer. But if you have thoughts, please. But I know Baba doesn't, well, he wants us to love others and be kind to others, so he would never want us to be martyrs or there's martyred people who pray when they're doing terrible things. And he also doesn't want us to bring on suffering to ourselves, extra suffering. But I think he does want us to accept with cheerfulness, as you said, whatever comes from him. And even that sometimes can be confusing for me, because if I think I have thoughts like Baba hates me, if I'm suffering, I'll start to think that's my fault and that therefore Baba hates me and I'm bad. And then what I've been doing lately is saying, this is Baba thinking through Barbara, that Barbara's bad because she's suffering because I'm confused about it. But the point, if there was a point, was in my life with Baba, I have felt like what he did for me was relieve suffering, lighten things, and that the fire of Baba's love was sublimation. I used the word sublime, making things beautiful, and it's not always painful if there's love involved to lose your sanskaras. And I'm sorry if that's too much, but somebody wanted to know about suffering on the path, and so I just thought I'd throw that out there, and I'm done now. So I'm myself up.
You have anything to add to that, Peter?
Of course, Baba doesn't want us to suffer. He said everyone has the right to be happy. He also commented that 99% of our suffering is unnecessary, but it's our habits, our deeply ingrained habits, that cause us to continue to suffer unnecessarily. All that isn't necessary. We're meant to be happy, but it's the mind, the thinking mind. I remember an analogy I loved from Adi Keirani, who is a very forthright person, very direct. He would say, the mind is like a filthy toilet. It is full of filth and shit. And now if you go on with the mind, with psychology, there's a speck of filth. How did that speck of filth become like that? And this is this speck of filth and that speck of filth. Why do all that such thing? Better take a bucket of Meher Baba's pure divine love water and splash it there, and the whole thing will just be clean. That was Adi's approach to it. So just think of Baba, and all of this gets burned up in his remembrance.
Rabia, you next. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Uncle.
Hi, Rabia.
How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Good. I've been loving your talk.
Hey, and I got to say, since we're on the subject of toilets, thanks for that washing scene.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, we're on the subject.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm glad you're enjoying
We're all family here.
Well, I think like the conversation from Barbara was kind of like what I was interested in too. I actually been thinking about suffering a lot lately, but I think what I'd like to kind of get your opinion on, or just a conversation around, is how much do we take on, as far as when I was thinking about my question, I was like, the answer, it's like to give everything to Baba first and then kind of take action from there. But, I always just feel like I get caught up in getting confused around other people's suffering or even my own, but oh gosh, like I'm going to go do something and try to help alleviate suffering. And then it's almost like I suffer more, or it feels very overwhelming. Yes. And I think even just through asking, I'm like, oh, yes, that's probably why, because you're thinking you're doing something Absolutely. To help. Then it feels so awful. And I'm like, oh, well, if you can just give it to him first, then it's going to be more effective anyway.
It is very difficult to traverse this path through the maze of illusion without a perfect master. So this is kind of like surfing, finding that balance. How much should I suffer or not? Best is take Baba's name and go forward. And it is true what you say. Now, you being a medical person, you being a doctor, here's the problem. According to Upasi Maharaj, being a doctor is a very dangerous profession when you take money, because you don't know if you're trying to suppress the suffering of a person, you are taking on some of those sanskars where they were meant to suffer. It's a very touchy thing. But the real point of being caught, as Baba explained from time to time, was identification with the action. That means when we say, I'm doing this, you're caught. You're caught. We cannot find, though, that right attitude unless we have a proper perspective based upon the explanations Baba had given through the years, that in reality, this is illusion. This is not it. This is not reality. This is a dream. We are all a projection of God in one way or another. It is God that is doing everything. So if we identify with these actions, we're identifying with falseness, and that gets us caught. And this goes on and on according to Baba for 8,400,000 lifetimes. It is what Buddha has described as the endless wheel of births and deaths. It's impossible to extricate oneself from it. Only a perfect master can get us out of it. So the answer is very simple. Yes, you give it to him, you think of him, and the results are also his then. To find that balance, to surf that wave, is simply this, though, as he said. Do your very best. Then, don't worry, be happy, and I will help you. Very simple.
Then we complicate it.
It's peculiar because each of us has a responsibility of work in the world to produce a result. And yet, Baba said, leave the result to him. That doesn't mean we don't work towards that. We have to do our best. But then at a certain point, it's his. There's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah. I find that what I've been noticing lately is that I suffer when I'm attached to the result.
Yeah. Each person has their karma and they have to go through it. Have to do our best. And non-attachment to the action, knowing that as Baba working through us. Baba described that as provisional ego. Baba is doing this, I'm not doing this. It's his responsibility. Use your mind. Mani used to say to us sometimes, people who are residents and had the responsibility of work there, well, he's given you a brain, hasn't he? So use it. But we have to find that balance. And that is with non-identification with the action. That's surrender to him. That's what it is.
I think, too, sometimes we use our brain so much, but remembering to use our hearts and our connection to him, it's just like I get so brain heavy and I get heart light, which to me, my heart is like how he talks to me. And so then this world is just so much about the brain, and no heart. I suffer more too.
You'll find the balance. You don't have to worry. You will find the balance. From birth, you had the connection, what Bayezid called congenital felicity to God. So you have that great fortune. You don't have to worry. Just take advantage of your opportunity to be with him.
Well, I love you.
Love you too.
Thank you, Rabia. Being in the medical profession, I appreciated what you guys were talking about. Anyway, Big Al asks you, what does Gamala Yoga fit in? Where does it fit in with suffering discourse?
Gamala Yoga was just that phase in 1924 of the work at Mehrabad. And that was the discourse that Baba gave about the two types of perfect masters, two types of liberated souls that suffer for humanity and the differences. The Mandali suffered a lot in Gamala Yoga. Baba was fasting the whole time and began his seclusion during that period in the Jopti. The Jopti was built and Baba began doing periods of seclusion in the Jopti during the Gamala Yoga months. Essentially only 2 months, April and May 1924 at Mehrabad.
Jai Baba. Thank you, Peter.
My great joy. Hey, Baba.
Deva. Deva.
Hey, Baba.
Hey, Baba.